Good morning, Amani, 8th grade. Welcome back to poetry. I hope everyone is well. Last week we dove into similes and metaphors, two forms of figurative language that writers use to spice up and enliven their writing. I use them too. Similes do this by drawing comparisons to objects to help a reader visualize something or feel something by making a comparison between two unlike objects. Note that word unlike, not comparing something to something that's similar. Metaphors do this by essentially replacing one object or concept with something else or alluding, hinting at something else. Metaphors have always been the tough one for me. The stone that is my brain has a hard time wrapping itself around the concept. What did I just do there? The stone that is my brain. It's just not the same without students. I gotta say, this video thing. Oh, God, I wish I had some students here. The stone that is my brain. Wow, that was weird. They look kind of like a tough crowd. I wish I had maybe an assistant teacher to help me with them. Wow, that was weird. Wonder how many wishes I get. Anyhow, back to the lesson. So, back to what we were talking about. The metaphor, the stone that is my brain. Is that a metaphor? What does that metaphor suggest or allude to regarding the way I think? The stone that is my brain. I want you to pause the video right here and think about that for a second. If I'm saying the stone that is my brain, what am I saying about myself? So if you thought to yourself that the metaphor, the stone that is my brain, maybe what I'm saying is that not a lot sinks in, or I don't really think very clearly, you kind of got it, because I'm saying that metaphor of a stone, when we think about a stone, we don't really think about any great knowledge coming from it. So that is a metaphor. I'm literally replacing my brain with the image of a stone. So those were similes and metaphors. But today we're going to move on and we're going to be thinking about and studying personification. So what is personification? Pause this video and think about it for a second. Going to give you 3 more seconds. 2, 1. Personification. If you answer that yourself and it's when a writer gives an inanimate or non-living item a human characteristic of some sort, that's great. Now, pause the video and think to yourself, can you come up with an example of personification? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If you think you have that answer, great, congrats. Was it something like the car growls at me as it speeds past, or something like the flirtatious stars winked at me when they saw me in my new suit? Nicely done. Let's take a look at those two. So before we begin, I just want to go over a couple of things. We're going to go over the objective, but first, classroom rules and regulations. I'm sorry, I should have given you that straight up. You know, I want you sitting up straight. I want you to track the speaker, and most importantly, absolutely no eating in class. Okay, so let's go over the objective of this lesson today. Olivia, can you tell me the objective today?
Identify and interpret literal meanings of personification in a poem.
Excellent. Identify and interpret literal meanings of personification in the poem. That's a whole bunch of English gobbledygook. What does that really mean? So we're going to look at personification when a non-human object is given a human characteristic, okay, and then we're going to explain what the literal meaning of that is. And whatever your name is, young man, can you read me the second objective, please?
Explain how personification affects or impacts the mood of a poem.
Excellent, Abe. Thank you so much. So we're also going to look at how personification affects or impacts the mood of a poem. That's a little trickier. So let's go back to those examples that I had. That car growling at me as it speeds past, and those stars twinkling, I think I said mischievously or something like that. Flirtatiously, that's what I said. Stars twinkling or blinking flirtatiously at me in my new suit. Let's take a look at those two forms of personification and talk about how it might give us hints about the mood of that particular sentence. So we're going to be looking at the mood, how personification affects the mood in a poem. But let's just take these two examples on their own. So now, generally speaking, we attribute growling to wild animals like tigers or panthers, or maybe Acacia and Asia. You know who I'm talking about. But people growl too, though it might be closer to grumble, grumble. Anyhow, if we think about the sentence, a car growls, we know cars don't growl, but we also know what that sound literally is, that growling. What is that personification literally sounding like? It's the car revving its engine, or it's making a loud noise in its engine like it needs to be in the repair shop or something. But the second thing we have to look at and think about is the mood that that sentence brings. This growl brings or hints at a mood. This is not the beginning of a love poem, or maybe not your standard love poem. Is it calm? Is it ominous? Possibly full of danger? Is it soothing? Really, is a car like revving its engine soothing to you? Well, maybe if you live in the city, but think about that for a second. Similarly, the flirtatious stars brings with it a literal, knowledge. What is happening up in the sky when I say the stars are blinking? Well, if a star is blinking at you, you're just having issues. But if the stars are blinking at you, you know that something's going on with the light or how it's shining. But when we use it as personification, what are we really thinking? It is an illusion, a hint at a mood. We're talking about a mood. Stars twinkling, blinking flirtatiously. Now, so this is a mood. Is it calm? Is it hyped up? Think about it for a second. I'm going to give you 3 seconds. Calm or hyped? You tell me. 3, 2, 1. So let's take a look at one of the poems that's in your packet, which is Rocking by Gabriela Mistral. Great name. I love that. I actually have an aunt whose name is Gabrielle, but that's a whole nother story. So Rocking is a poem that has some personification in it, and you should be able to see the poem in front of you. So we're going to read this poem twice. Why? Because we should be reading poetry twice. Once just to get the feel for it, and the second time we're going to be looking more closely at the language of the poem. But we got to feel the poem first, because poems are meant to be read and felt. So I'm going to let you actually read the poem. You should have it either on a split screen, or you can see it on my shared screen. So I'll give you about 30 seconds to read this poem, and then I'll read it. Rocking by Gabriela Mistral. 1,000 waves divine the sea she rocks. I hear the loving seas and rock my son, my son. Night fields of wheat the wandering wind rocks. I hear the loving winds and rock my son, my son. His 1,000 worlds silent godfather rocks. I feel his hand in shades and rock my son, my son. Now, is this a favorite poem of mine? No, but we're going to take something out of it regardless. First of all, let's just take a look at the first stanza. If we're looking at personification, if we think 1,000 waves divine the sea she rocks, when we think of waves and the sea, I think of things like crashing waves or cresting waves or curling waves, all sea words, by the way. But I don't really think of a sea as rocking. And we're talking about, I hear the loving seas and rock my son. So personally, I'm picturing kind of the rocking of a baby. And the personification in this particular poem is the sea doing what a mother does, which is rock her baby. We go from the sea to a night field of wheat. So a different visual element, but the same thing. The wandering wind rocks. I hear the loving winds. We've got these big elements, the sea and the wind and these fields. But the main thing is the personification of rocking. We've got all this imagery, right? Things that we can picture. But the main thing is to understand that the one big use of personification is the actual act of rocking. So, a short poem with personification, and if we're thinking again, how does the personification affect the mood of the poem? Is this a rock and roll poem, even though we got rockin' in it? No, not really. Okay, this is a calm, soothing mood brought on by the personification. So the personification affects the poem by giving us a mood that is calm. Does that make sense? So the second poem in your packet for the personification, and I'm not going to read the whole thing because you are, but it's The Drought by Gary Soto. If we think about drought and the Dust Bowl, you guys know stuff already about what a drought looks like and feels like. So I want you to keep that in mind of Mice and Men we looked at, we read this year. This should be kind of familiar territory to you when you read it. So you're always bringing that prior knowledge that you have in with you, right? So let me just, I'm just going to read the first part of it, and we're really just going to look at tone and mood, or rather, let's just go with mood brought on by the personification. So here we go. Remember, I'm not going to read the whole thing. You're going to read it. I'm just going to take you through a little bit of it. The drought. The clouds shouldered a path up the mountains east of Ocampo and then descended, scraping their bellies gray on the cracked shingles of slate. I'm looking at two pieces of personification in that. Think about it for a second. The clouds shouldered a path up onto the mountain, shouldered a path. Okay. So that right there would be personification. And then the clouds again being described as scraping their bellies gray on the cracked shingles of slate. We're talking about clouds don't have bellies. I hate to tell you. They might be fat, they might be puffy. Bellies? No. So again, two pieces of personification. Do we get a mood from it? Okay, maybe it's a little harder. It doesn't sound, well, it might sound a little ominous, honestly. But let's go on to the next one because that's a tough one. They entered the valley, talking about the clouds, and passed the roads that went trackless, the houses blown open, their cellars creaking, and lined with the bottles that held their breath for years. That's interesting. Houses holding their breath, and the wind is blowing it open. So think about that as personification. Okay. Now we know the poem is titled Drought. As we go through the poem deeper, you're going to get more examples of drought. We know again from past reading of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck, The Harvest Gypsies, which was nonfiction by Steinbeck. We can picture this drought. We can picture the farms that he is talking about. So when you get the whole poem, when you read the whole poem in its entirety, you're going to see the mood attached to the personification is going to turn, a little bit, trying to find a word better than ominous, but it's a little down, it's a little depressing as we see how this drought is affecting everybody. So personification, just want to go over again, is when you give a non-human object human characteristics. Get that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that will affect the tone and the mood of the poem, depending on what the personification is. So first we're trying to understand what we should be picturing, and then making a connection to the poem itself. So I probably have three wishes. I got students, I got an assistant teacher, I don't know, win the lottery. Everybody have a good week.